is great to be with you on this Tuesday, smoking hot outside and college football heating up. It is great to talk with our friend Phil Steele from Phil Steele's College Football Preview, and he is on the other end of the line. Phil, great to have you on. How you doing this summer?
You know, I am doing great, Dennis. I imagine you're doing great with Michigan off the big national championship this year.
Well, normally everybody's counting down the days, 50 days, and everyone's like, oh, the season has been so long, but that's really not been the case this year. You catch people once in a while saying, oh, I can't wait for college football, but then they're like, yeah, I am, kind of enjoying this off season. Usually we're asking you to, the preview the season, which we'll do, but how about a thought on their title run from where you were sitting, watching all these games and watching all the drama unfold till Michigan ultimately beat Washington on that January the 8th?
Enjoyed it a lot. I know there was a lot of stuff going on with the Harbaugh suspension and things like that, but you just look at the overall talent on that team. I mean, I had them number 7 on my experience chart last year. They were one of the most experienced teams in the entire country. They had the veteran quarterback, one of the top offensive lines in the country, of course, one of the top defenses. And, when it got to be playoff time, it was nice to see that strength of defense and strength at the offensive line. I'm old school. I like to see that pretty much dominate. And I love the way Michigan steamrolled its way to the title.
Yeah, they did. You mentioned Jim Harbaugh. Now Jim Harbaugh's in the pros and Sharon Moore takes over. How do you think that transition? We had Moore coaching 4 games last year, so he got a little bit of a taste of it. It looks like he's going to approach philosophically how they play football. You talked about old school with a smash approach, but how do you think Sharon Moore sets up here in his first year?
Yeah, I don't think it's going to be that huge of a transition. Now, granted, when Sharon Moore was the head coach, we're going to put that in quote marks for those games, Jim Harbaugh had run the team during the week, and that's not going to happen this week. But the fact that he's been there, knows the system, is keeping the system basically the same. A lot of the stuff is the same, knows all the players. I don't think the transition is going to be that big as far as the coaching goes. Yeah, this team is less experienced. We'll get into that. But I think coaching, not a major change this year.
We're talking with Phil Steele. He's been doing the Phil Steele College Football Preview since 1995. And, you mentioned the players that Michigan has to replace, and, of course, the coaches that we're talking about. Essentially, the entire offensive line, there's some guys that have had some starts at Michigan and elsewhere, but that's going to be the bread and butter. It's going to start that way for almost every team, but especially Michigan, knowing that they want to run the ball so much. Can they reload, or do you feel like that's going to take some time with Michigan up front on the offensive side?
Yeah, let's take a look where Michigan's offensive line has been the last 3 years. Joe Moore Award winner, and if the vote was held after the playoffs were over last year, perhaps Joe Moore Award winner last year. I thought they were the best offensive line in the playoff. Maybe during the season they had a couple of spots where they weren't, but yeah, they were. You're talking about one of the premier offensive lines in the country. Now, will this year's offensive line be good? No doubt about it. They've got plenty of talent, as you touched on. There are guys with starting experience. They bring in Josh Preby coming in from Northwestern. I like Crippen at center. I think he's solid. And then you look at Hinton at left tackle. He's a guy that had starting experience at Stanford. So it's not like they've got a bunch of freshman walk-ons taking over here. This is a unit that's going to be good. But I don't think they're at the top 5 or 6 offensive lines in the country like they've been the last 3 years.
What about, a lot of times I would ask this question first, the quarterback position? J.J. McCarthy gets drafted by the Minnesota Vikings, number 10 overall, and there's very little experience besides a 6-year guy in Jack Tuttle. Maybe he'll be in the mix, but Alex Orji could be great. We're not 100% sure, kind of a question mark there, but he's the presumptive starter, Phil. That's what I've been saying. How do you look at the Michigan quarterback position?
I have 2 question marks on this year's team. I have no question mark about the defense, no question mark about the run game or the receivers. The offensive line, How much of a drop off from last year, and then naturally the quarterback. If Orgy wins a job, there's no doubt this guy's an athlete. I mean, he's 6'3", 236, dangerous runner. He carries himself like he's the starter, but you wonder about the completion percentage and how that would work out. Warren's got a big arm. Jack Tuttle is a guy that's got the most experience, could be a game manager. But you're going from a guy that got drafted in the top 10 of the NFL draft and was a veteran starter to a bunch of inexperience and pretty much question marks. I don't think any of these three guys get drafted next year like J.J. McCarthy did. So really the quarterback is the elephant in the room right now.
Yeah, well, for Michigan, they play that old school football where they, it's not quarterback and spread it out and throw the ball downfield. They'll rely on their defense, and they're going to run the ball an awful lot. And of course, if it's Orgy, you already mentioned about his athleticism, and he has been in even last year. They had different packages for him. He was running the ball, so it might be one of those things where it could be a work in progress when you have a defense able to get that ball back for you. Although, they got Texas staring at them on the 7th, so it could take a while to develop, but they got to get it going pretty quick.
Yeah, and that's really going to be the key. And like you touched on, Dennis, I mean, even when McCarthy was the quarterback the last 2 years, they didn't make him throw the football over the field. They didn't open him up. They kept him sort of playing the game that Michigan plays. So that is a benefit for this season. I do not like the fact that Texas game is game 2 for Michigan because, I touched on the fact that Michigan was number 7 in my experience chart last year. This year, they're number 117. And so a big drop off in experience, and it may take a little bit to get that going. So Texas week 2 is a tough test because of the 4 playoff teams last year, only one of them has their head coach back and their quarterback as well. And that's Texas, which has one of the best quarterback rooms in the country. That's going to be quite a test week 2. I'm glad it's in the big house for Michigan fans, but I do think Michigan's a slight underdog in that game at home.
Yeah, they are. We'll ask you a little bit about that game against the Longhorns. Let me finish up on the offensive side. You said you like some of the other skill positions, wide receiver. Michigan's been doing a good job at tight end. Of course, running back, they lose Blake Corum, but they've got a lot of good options there. How do you see the other skill positions there other than the quarterback at Michigan?
Yeah, running back Donovan Edwards, I think, will really have himself a good year. I think he was one of the top running backs coming out of high school. Sort of was in the shadow of Corum last year, especially when they got near the goal line. I look for a lot more touchdowns out of Edwards this year. But they also have guys like Khalil Mullings, a guy that's highly underrated, and then Jordan Marshall, the true freshman. The coach is really high on him. So I like the running back core, no doubt about it. You touched on the tight end. Might have the best tight end in the country in Colston Loveland. They've also got Marlon Klein there, who's another guy who's 6'6", 245, and could be just as good as Loveland. So it's great to work with tight ends. And the thing is, Dennis, one thing I've noticed, look at the teams at the top lately, like Georgia and Michigan. All the defenses, what they do with that, what used to be the strong side linebacker position, they've sort of dumbed that down, turned it into a nickelback, gotten smaller, faster on the defense. When you line up with 2 tight ends, you're going against, I think it's an advantage. It's a mismatch for the offense. So I do like 2 tight end offenses. And then you look at the receiving core. I think when you look at Tyler Morris, he's a guy that could have a big year. He should be their number 1 receiver by far. They also have Frederick Moore, a guy that can take the top off. They bring in C.J. Charleston from Youngstown State. And the thing I've also found out going through all these teams with the coaches and going through all the players is that these FCS transfers, as long as they have experience, step right in and do well their first year. So keep your eyes on Charleston as well. Overall, I like the receiving core. I like the running back core even better.
Yeah, Michigan had they had an influx last year. Some of Josiah Stewart was one, made a big play in the Rose Bowl. Phil, you mentioned it twice about you've talked to the coaches. Michigan is known to kind of put up the stop sign a lot of times when it comes to some of the things with the media. How has been your interaction in the summer when you said, "Hey, Phil Steele's on the other end of the line"? You get right to Sharon Moore. I mean, how did that go for you?
Nope, didn't go well. No, I talked to over 120 of the 134 head coaches. The ones a couple I didn't talk to. I didn't talk to Sharon Moore of Michigan. I didn't talk to Bronco Mendenhall at New Mexico, Jim Moore of Connecticut. Now, sometimes it's a scheduling thing. Yeah, well, it's like with Moore, he was this and then do time available and couldn't get it in, things like that. But pretty much with Michigan, it was nope, you're not talking to the head coach. So what the heck? It doesn't bother me one way or the other. There's nothing about Michigan out there. I know the team pretty well.
Well, it's just something that they've done over the years that they just continue with. It's never going to change. We'll be here in 20 years, and I think you'll say the same thing. The defense. You've talked in glowing terms, and I understand why. Looking at it, how did you look at the units when you broke it down, and then collectively, what Sharon Moore has on that side of the ball for U of M, which should lead the way?
Yeah, this is a top 5 defense, no doubt about it. You look at them up front on the defensive line. Now, I don't think they have the depth that they had last year, but you look at the starting 4 guys. They've got Derek Moore, Kenneth Grant, Mason Graham, Josiah Stewart. Next year, when you're watching the NFL draft, figure those 4 guys are pretty much all in it. That's a heck of a front line. There's not as much experience in the depth, so depth is a question mark up front, but I love the 4 starters. You go to the linebacker position. I mean, bringing in Jayshon Barham from Maryland, I thought was huge. Barham's a guy that was one of my top-rated linebackers out of high school, 235 pounds. He's got tons of starting experience. That's really good. And then Hausman is another guy that had 49 tackles last year. He's a transfer that had come in from Nebraska and fit into the system well. So very happy with the linebacking core. I rate the defensive line number 4 in the country. I rate the linebackers number 18. And then you go to the secondary. You got Will Johnson, one of the best cornerbacks in the country, strong safety Makari Page. And then they add in Louisville's free safety, Wesley Walker, as well. I've got him in the number 8 defensive back. So it's a top 5 defense. No questions at all about the defensive side of the ball for me.
Hey, Phil, I don't know if you have an answer for this, but I wanted to ask you the question anyway. So Wink Martindale comes in and takes over. He had been in the pros for so long as the defensive coordinator, as Jesse Minter. He follows Jim Harbaugh to the Chargers, and before that it was Mike McDonald, who's now the Seahawks head coach. But Wink was he kind of I don't know if he invented, but his scheme, it is the scheme that he brought in. These guys have fine-tuned it, but there's some Michigan fans that think that Wink blitzes too much. Do you feel like has anybody talked about that with you about maybe Wink is too blitz happy?
That has been the one critique that I have heard. I didn't get to talk to Coach Martindale directly, so I can't tell you that. But that is the one thing that I've heard. And generally, blitzing is good. You get a lot of pressure on the quarterback, but you can also give up some big plays. You go back to that Michigan-Ohio State game a couple of years ago where big plays won it for Michigan, because Ohio State was too blitz happy. So it is something to look at. But the good thing is we know it's all pretty much close to the same system that they've been running.
Phil Steele, a couple more minutes here. Phil Steele's college football preview. It is out exclusively at Barnes & Noble, and you can also, we'll have Phil tell you if you're someone that likes to just get it online, the availability there. That's at your fingertips. You can get that immediately. Phil, I was looking, you projected what the AP preseason top 10 will be, and you got Georgia there, number 1, Ohio State, Texas, Oregon, 2, 3, 4, Alabama, Notre Dame, Michigan at 7. When you look at Michigan's schedule, they play at Ohio State. We already mentioned, they host Texas in week 2. And then now you've got Oregon in the Big Ten, and Michigan will host Oregon on November the 2nd. When you put all the numbers in there, how did Michigan's schedule rank for you?
Yeah, I've got Michigan's schedule ranked number 15 in the country, so it is pretty tough. And really, when you look at it, to me, I've got them favored in 9 of their 12 games. I've got the Oregon game around a toss-up. I've got them a slight underdog to Texas and definitely an underdog at Ohio State. I think that Oregon game is huge if you're a Michigan fan. If Michigan defeats Oregon in the Big House on November the 2nd, I think Michigan clearly makes the playoff this year. A loss there, though, could mean 3 losses, which might might make it tough to make the playoffs. So I think the game in Autzen is huge. Of course, the game against Texas is huge. I'm not saying that Michigan's going to definitely lose. I just have a slight underdog in it. So I think those two home games, they've got to at least split them to be able to get back in the playoff this year.
Yeah, a lot of the conversation is about that new 12-team college football playoff, and a lot of people have been running the numbers and thinking about, well, if you have one loss and you're playing Ohio State on that last week, what happens if you lose 2 times in a row, or if it was Ohio State that lost 2 times in a row, would a 3-loss team be able to get in there? And my answer to that is maybe. There's a lot of things that have to play out, but if you has there been much talk about that when you're having conversations across the country with people that are interested in college football? Of course, this new playoff.
Yeah, I do think a 3-loss Big Ten or SEC team is going to make the playoff out of one of those 2 conferences this year. The conferences are too big, too strong not to make it. The way I see it, Dennis, I see the Big 12 champ getting in, the ACC champ getting in, Notre Dame getting in, the Group of 5 team getting in. Those 4 are locked in. And then the other 8 spots, you're probably looking at 4 to 5 SEC schools, 3 to 4 Big Ten schools. And I do believe between the SEC and the Big Ten, we will see a 3-loss team get in there.
All right. I like that. I wanted to ask you, Michigan playing Texas, Quinn Ewers, you already mentioned him. They play Oregon. We talked about that. Dylan Gabriel, the transfer from Oklahoma. He's a lefty, 6 years. When somebody had asked me, who do I think is better, Ewers or Gabriel? I said, I got to ask Phil Steele that question. How did you rank those guys, right next to each other, or who'd you give the nod to?
Yeah, I would say when I look at the individuals, I would probably lean a little bit with yours maybe, but I think Dylan Gabriel is going to have better stats this year because Oregon throws the football better, and Oregon probably has a little bit better. Well, the depth is really close. I mean, they both have excellent backup quarterbacks, but, when you look at last year at Oregon, Bo Nix had 45 touchdown passes and 3 interceptions. So it's a really quarterback-friendly system. And Dylan Gabriel, while he didn't have those type of numbers, he had 30 touchdowns, 6 interceptions last year. I think he comes in and thrives. He's got my number 1 receiving core in the country to throw to. So statistically, I think Gabriel has the better year.
Phil, Ohio State, you got it number 2. Michigan has beat Ohio State 3 years in a row. And you look at the Buckeyes, what they've done in recruiting, the transfer portal, a lot of the players that they brought back that could have gone to the pros. I mean, they're really, it's really an impressive roster. What about Will Howard? What do you make of him? There's a game that I watched him when he was the quarterback at Kansas State, and he looked great. And yet I've had people say, hey, go check out the game that he played at Oklahoma State. He looked terrible. What do you make of what I think is going to be Ohio State's quarterback, Howard, the transfer from K-State?
Yeah, I think Howard wins a job as well. And believe it or not, had Will Howard stuck around at Kansas State, he probably would have lost the job to Avery Johnson this year. So that's something to point out. But in the same token, I think Will Howard fits the Chip Kelly system better. In years past, they've been a little bit more pass happy. I think this year they run the quarterback more. They've got depth at quarterback, like Devin Brown being the backup. That's a nice backup to have because he's also a mobile quarterback. So I think you'll see him run the quarterback more. Will Howard did lead Kansas State to the Big 12 title. And look at the surrounding talent he's got. It is probably the biggest question on Ohio State, but in the same token, you've got a veteran quarterback that's a 3-year starter that already led his team to a conference title in the Power 5. I think Will Howard will come out with a pretty good season this year with all the surrounding talent they have. And, Ohio State's talent this year is Michigan has partially itself to blame because I think a lot of these guys stuck around because they've lost 3 straight years to Michigan, and they can't say they went their entire Ohio State career without beating them. So guys like Ty Hamilton, Jack Sawyer, JT Tuimoloau, who all could have gone to the NFL draft, said, you know what, we're going to come back and play our senior year. And then they added in a bunch of transfers. So this is definitely a talent-laden Ohio State team and very experienced.
Well, you can't do this, Phil, but I wish that in part I could. I wish this year's Michigan team could play last year's schedule, and then last year's team, which is so loaded, could play. And then, because Ohio State looks like they're a lot better team, and so that would be a collision course. If you could play that game, that's a nice game, to play. I wanted to ask you, over the years, you've got a lot of different features in your magazine, but you get to turnover margin, and Michigan led the country. They had the fewest penalties And that's going to be tough when you have to replace so many on the offense, fewest penalties per game, but they also led the country in turnover margin. And I believe, I don't have that feature right in front of me, but you've studied the turnover margin, and I believe you think it's random from year to year. Is that right? So Michigan fans shouldn't expect automatically that they'll be back taking the ball away and then also protecting it as well.
Yeah, and Dennis, this takes us all the way back to that first year that we did the show together back in 1995, which, by the way, I greatly appreciate you having me on in the first year of the magazine and each and every year since then. But that was the first metric article. It was the only metric article in that 1995 magazine was turnovers equals turnaround. And over the 30 years, it's had about a 75 to 80% success rate, saying that if you benefited from double-digit turnovers one year, the next year you have a weaker record. And on the flip side, if you had negative double-digit turnovers one year, you had a better record the next year. 75 to 80% of the time that comes true. Give an example. Last year, USC was coming off a season where they were plus 22 in turnovers. Their quarterback won the Heisman Trophy. They went 11-3. Last year, they dropped all the way down to -1. They lost 5 games last year, which was sort of unexpected, but due to the turnovers, you didn't have it unexpected. So yes, and granted, Michigan went 15-0 last year, so of course their record will probably drop this year. I can't anticipate almost any team going undefeated this season, but yeah, having the I don't think plus 19 in turnovers is going to happen again.
I hear you on that. It's the one thing I chew over all the numbers and look at them. And yeah, you win a championship, you play like Michigan did last year. They're going to have a lot. The bar's pretty high on almost everything that they did. The special teams, you go through it. So that's one part you have to look at. You know, I wanted to ask you how you think this thing is going to unfold. I mean, that leaves you a lot of leash to do whatever you want. But I'm just looking at a feedback from Blue Wolverine, who says if Michigan gets that Week 2 win over Texas, everyone's going to have to rethink how we rank and where Michigan's at. And I think it's a good point. If Michigan's able to beat Texas with a essentially new offensive line and 10 new starters on the offensive side, and they beat a Texas team that I agree with you is going to be right there in the top 3, the Michigan's going to move all the way up, and everything that we're saying now, you know, it's going to be looked at a lot different. That's a great thing, and also the dangerous thing about playing a big time team early.
Yeah, I agree, Dennis. And you know, I'll tell you what, if I was an AP voter, I'm not. I'm on every award committee, but I'm not an AP voter. If I was an AP voter and Michigan defeats Texas Week 2 and Texas comes into the season number 3 in the country, and you have the defending champ and they're undefeated, I would vote Michigan number 1 at that point. I mean, it would have had the biggest win of the season. They're the defending national champ. They haven't lost forever. I would put them number 1 in the AP poll if they beat Texas.
I'm with you on that. Tell me how you think the season unfolds as you look at it. You have to make the predictions. Michigan fans are waiting for what you're going to say about them. A lot of them already have the magazine, so they have been saying things in the chat here about your prediction on Michigan this year. But how do you see the Big Ten unfolding, and then getting into that college football playoff, how it's going to end up?
Yeah, I think, as mentioned, I think the key for Michigan getting into the college football playoff is either knock off Texas or Oregon at home. I think if Michigan's got 2 losses at the end of the year, I do think they lose at Ohio State. Either Texas or Oregon, I still think they make the playoff easily with 2 losses. The Big Ten would get in. But the 2 teams I have playing for the Big Ten title this year are Ohio State and Oregon. And, you know, you go back to the experience chart last year for Michigan, they were number 7. This year, they're number 117. Well, Ohio State is much more experienced than they were last year. And the Ducks are very experienced as well. So I think you have 2 really loaded teams, probably have better schedules. So if you look at Oregon, they get Ohio State at home. That's a plus for them. With Ohio State, they do have to play Oregon and Penn State on the road, but they could end up being favored in both games. Right now, they're actually a slight dog against Oregon, which I agree with. So I think Ohio State, Oregon, Penn State, Michigan, Iowa, all near the top. And I just went with Ohio State and Oregon playing for the Big Ten title. But if Michigan was to beat Oregon or Texas at home, they will make the playoff this year.
I like it. I like what you're saying. I want to tell people how to get the magazine, how to get it online as well. I got a final question. It's for Michigan State. Jonathan Smith comes in from Oregon State, and it's good that I know Michigan State fans that they're just talking about football after last year's disaster with Mel Tucker. But, they do have a sophomore quarterback in Aiden Childs who comes over as a transfer. He's a dual threat. When you ranked everything out with Michigan State and looked at them, how do you think the Spartans are going to fare in the Big Ten in Smith's first year?
It looks like a rebuilding year. Now, I went over Jonathan Smith's first team at Oregon State with them, and this team has more talent than this first team at Oregon State, but they also draw a pretty tough schedule. I mean, when you look at some of the home games this year, Ohio State and Iowa, they're going to be an underdog in both of those, and that means most of the winnable games take place on the road. So I think with the fact they come in number 115 on my experience chart, a lot of players hit the portal. It may make it difficult for Michigan State to improve much on last year's 4-win total. I did pick them towards the bottom of the Big Ten.
All right. Barnes & Noble, everyone familiar with the bookstore. It's around, the one right in Ann Arbor, right there. A lot of traffic out there, but hey, that's Ann Arbor. They're putting a Chick-fil-A right down the street for that Barnes & Noble, but you can, get a chicken sandwich and get Phil Steele's college football preview. How about for the people that say, I want to have it on my laptop, I want to have it on my phone? How do they do that, Phil?
I appreciate that, Dennis. And once again, if you're driving around looking for it, it's 352 pages, 2 full pages on every team. We give the same amount of coverage on Eastern Michigan than we do on Alabama or Ohio State. 2 full pages, and it's like getting 134 media guides rolled into one. Now, as Dennis touched on, if you don't drive around looking for it, just go to Barnes & Noble. It's exclusively at Barnes & Noble, not at Walmart, no grocery stores, Barnes & Noble exclusively. Or you can go online to philsteele.com. And when you go to philsteele.com, if you order the hard copy of the magazine, I charge you a shipping charge because it costs to ship things, but we give you the digital magazine for free, or you could just purchase the digital magazine. And we actually update that all the way through the start of the season, Dennis. So coaching changes. We've just had 2 of them. Jeff Tedford left Fresno State, just retired, I believe it was yesterday. We've already got that coaching change on the digital magazine. And the same thing, Utah State let go of their head coach. That's updated. So the digital is updated all the way through September, but Barnes & Noble or philsteele.com are the 2 places to go.
All right, Phil, thanks so much for your time. I know you're out of it. You love college football so much. I know the other thing that you like is pro football. Do you have any other interest besides football?
None. Well, my children. How about that?
There you go. That's a good recovery, Phil. Hey, great job.
Yeah.
It's always enjoyable talking with you in the summer. It just gets us ready for the season. Even though we're just staying present and enjoying last year, it'll be the end of August before we know it. Thanks so much for joining us. Looking forward to diving into the preview, and continued success for you.
Hey, thank you, Dennis. And once again, greatly appreciate you having me on all 30 years. Let's do it another 30 years, my friend.
That sounds great to me, Phil. Have a great day. See you later.
All right, thanks.
There he is, Phil Steele, joining us here, talking a little Michigan and, the rest of it out there. I know there's a lot of people when, last year Phil had Michigan up there pretty high, and it's the nature of this business. If I went on a show I've done a few radio shows over the years in Cleveland, immediately when it happens, everyone's like, what are you bringing up a guy from the state up north? I mean, just automatically, it doesn't matter. If you're talking Michigan State, it's like, well, this guy, it's like that. So, you do have to deal with that. And when you make predictions, you also have to deal with that part as well. People come and, stick it in your face. But, hey, that's part of it as well. Thanks to Phil. We'll talk with you tomorrow at 2:00. Former Wolverine Jim Scarcelli will join us, and we look forward to what Scar has to say about Michigan football. Until then, don't forget the Maize and Blue review. We want you, you got Phil Steele and his magazine, but you want to know about everything that's going on in recruiting. You want to know on the football side, you're looking at the transfer portal. Will Michigan have, with their 16 commitments, how many are they going to get this year? How things are shaping up. Fall camp is really right around the corner. I know when you're talking about the end of the month, because that Michigan is playing Fresno State on August 31st. So they start July 31st. So it is happening. So all of the latest, the inside with the Maize and Blue Review, go to michigan.rivals.com. I'll see you over there on the Den. We're always posting, talking about Michigan, talking about beating Ohio State for a fourth time in a row. Mello won't know what to do with himself once that happens. So we'll see you over there on the Den, and we will talk with you tomorrow at 2:00.